Let's simulate such a situation.
The international criminal Vladimir Putin goes live on air and announces another ultimatum. He gives the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine 24 hours to sign the capitulation, withdraw troops from Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and accept non-aligned status for the remaining part of Ukraine. If they refuse after 24 hours, the Russian armed forces will use tactical nuclear weapons on Ukraine's key transportation hubs, as well as on locations where Ukrainian military personnel are concentrated.
What will Volodymyr Zelensky do in this case? But more importantly, what will the West do?
I understand this is a very unpleasant topic, but it is simply necessary to raise it in the information space.
And first and foremost for the Western audience. That's why this video will have an English dub added. I ask you to help share the video. To do this, simply subscribe to the channel.
For some reason in the West, they believe that Russia will never use it, but we have a nuclear doctrine. Take a look at what it says. If someone's actions threaten our sovereignty or territorial integrity, we consider it possible to use all means at our disposal.
As noted before, Putin threatens nuclear weapons not because things are going well for him. He doesn't have a proportional response to the West raising the stakes. We talked about this in particular in an exclusive video for Patreon and Bitly, plus subscribers. Subscribe if interested, links in description. We discussed that the decision of the Russian president to supply weapons to various terrorist groups that could strike American bases will only worsen Moscow's relations with the Gulf monarchies and other countries. Cooperation with North Korea could lead to South Korea starting to supply weapons to Ukraine.
So for Putin, the threat is to start supplying weapons to other regions. It's a zugzwang. But here's how events might unfold in the case of Putin's nuclear ultimatum.
Does the West have a response option that aligns with the concept of gradual escalation? After all, since Putin may go all in for lack of other options, it means we need to act proactively.
What should NATO do? Eliminate the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons? Once again, as I did before February 24th, I am addressing the international community. Preemptive strikes, so that they know what will happen to them if they use it.
And first, about some technical aspects of this issue. Jens Stoltenberg, in one of his recent interviews, stated that the alliance is negotiating to bring nuclear weapons to a higher state of combat readiness, specifying that it is about modernizing this type of weapon. NATO's nuclear arsenal is growing due to increasing threats from Russia and China, but what types of nuclear weapons does NATO possess? The answer is none. The alliance does not have its own nuclear weapons. Only its members, the United States and France, possess them.
Yes, we're not considering the United Kingdom for now.
For the reason that the Foggy Albion does not possess tactical nuclear warheads, relying instead on strategic nuclear forces represented by ballistic missiles deployed on Vanguard-class submarines. But if we follow the logic of gradual escalation, then before using strategic weapons of mass destruction, there should still be a stage involving the use of low-yield nuclear warheads. At the same time, there's no need for alarm. Nuclear deterrence has allowed us to avoid major wars for a long time. And Europe, if it wants peace and stability, must prepare for war, for nuclear war.
The very fact of discussing this topic already lowers the threshold for the use of weapons. Secondly, we possess more of these weapons compared to NATO countries.
Yes, absolutely right.
Putin knows that what is currently deployed in Europe is clearly not enough to maintain the balance, if I may say so, of tactical nuclear deterrence.
I've already brought up this topic.
There are between 100 and 150 American B-61 nuclear bombs deployed in the Eurozone. Most of the tactical warheads range from 0.3 to 10 kilotons, although some B-61 bombs can be up to 400 kilotons. But in any case, the question of delivering the warhead remains, because the B-61 is a free-fall bomb, which means that to hit the target, the aircraft has to fly directly over it. Using aircraft in an air defense zone is impossible. From this perspective, these bombs are simply ineffective. Of course, in theory, attaching a UMPK module to them wouldn't be too difficult, but in any case, this would only increase the strike range by a maximum of 80 kilometers. In the event of a confrontation with Russia, this would mean the ability to strike targets in the shallow rear, and that's ineffective.
Such weapons should be able to reach strategic targets that are located far enough from the front line. That is, the American nuclear arsenal deployed in European countries simply does not meet today's challenges. Let me repeat once again, we are not discussing a scenario for using nuclear weapons, but rather a way to prevent it. To achieve this, Europe requires nuclear weapons capabilities on par with Russia. Do you understand?
I have already demanded the return of the nuclear weapons. I don't need strategic ones, as I'm not planning to go against America. Tactical ones are quite enough. Iskander has a range of 500 kilometers or more.
Yes, as you can see, the so-called axis of evil is much better prepared for Russian roulette with nuclear warheads. Iskander-M systems are deployed in Belarus and Kaliningrad, capable of delivering nuclear warheads with a yield of 5 kilotons or more over a distance of 500 kilometers using quasi-ballistic missiles. This means that almost all of Poland and part of Germany, including Berlin, are within the range of the system. Yes, I raised this issue more than a year ago because even then it was clear that Europe needed to respond somehow. In response to the nuclear threats from Russia's illegitimate president, including raising combat readiness of nuclear forces and modernizing delivery systems and nuclear weapons. None of this was done. As you can see, only now has the NATO Secretary General stated the need for consultations on this topic. The spoiled bigwigs have only now raised the issue of putting nuclear weapons on alert because of threats from Russia and China. But once again the question arises, what are you going to put on alert if you don't have anything? But here Emmanuel Macron can come to the rescue, as he has already proposed including French nuclear weapons in the common European defense. Such a proposal arose precisely because, apart from the United States, which is doing everything it can to force Europeans to take responsibility for their own security, only France possesses nuclear weapons that can be considered a deterrent against the Russian Iskander systems. The Air-Sol Moyenne Portée Améliorée cruise missiles, capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for 500 kilometers. The Air-Sol Moyenne Portée is launched from Rafale and Mirage aircraft. And this is the only thing that can currently counter the Russian nuclear threat. And of course, European NATO members need to settle and regulate the procedures for retaliatory use of nuclear weapons as soon as possible. And this is necessary not for escalation, but to restore nuclear parity, which allows both sides to keep each other in check. After all, that's how things are calmer in today's world.
I'm just expressing my own opinion. We are not considering the use of nuclear weapons in the area of the special military operation, but we are ready, for example, to confirm that we have them and are fully prepared for combat use. How can this be done? Still, in my opinion, this would be, for example, conducting real exercises with actual detonations of nuclear warheads at our existing test sites.
Yes, of course, I'll reassure everyone. Before issuing ultimatums or using nuclear weapons, Russia will likely conduct demonstrative nuclear exercises. The current situation isn't critical, but we must start preparing for Putin's nuclear blackmail now. As I mentioned, Europe's nuclear defense situation is currently dire, and it's really unclear what the European capitals will do if Putin actually gives Ukraine a nuclear ultimatum. How should they act? Judging by the fact that they are only planning to hold consultations about raising nuclear weapons to a higher state of readiness, Europe has not developed a clear response to such a challenge. Still, the situation has worsened. The situation escalated not because of Putin's rhetoric, but rather because of China's rhetoric, which first of all did not comment in any way on Putin's desire to revise the doctrine of nuclear weapons use. Previously, at least, he called for restraint, and secondly, due to the escalation around Taiwan, Xi Jinping stated that the United States is pushing China to attack the island. You have to admit, those are familiar phrases. We didn't attack like cowards at 4 Antimeridiem on peaceful cities, we were forced to retaliate. Therefore, if a special military operation is carried out in Taiwan, China will be interested in creating an informational background that shifts the focus of the international community from Asia to Eastern Europe.
In other words, it's not necessary to win, but you need to make sure that it's a losing situation for every side. It's a hopeless cause if they start a war over Taiwan or something else. But if you still think that they can do it, right? You think they're so powerful that they'll ultimately win. They need to be convinced that this victory would be a lonely one. In other words, they would pay a terrible price for winning this war. Do you understand what I'm saying? The best outcome is a strategy of deterrence where China loses. The second best strategy is a stalemate where nobody wins. The third outcome is that they win, but pay a terrible price for it.
Yes, Professor John Mearsheimer, one of the most respected American international relations experts, articulates the United States strategy very competently. The only problem is whether it can be implemented in several directions at once. After all, the global situation favors those who would like to open Pandora's box. Iran is also just one step away from creating its own weapon of retaliation. And they are also announcing a review of the doctrine for its use. That is, the threat is that conditions are being created in the world where anyone who feels wronged can try to make all their revisionist claims using nuclear weapons as an argument. You can reconsider existing borders, you can eliminate your opponents. Yes, there's a lot you can do. If the West doesn't develop countermeasures right now, not just against the use of nuclear weapons, but even against the threat of their use, it risks ending up at the epicenter of a nuclear mushroom cloud.
More nuclear weapons and less arms control make the world more dangerous. That's exactly why we in NATO have worked so hard to engage Russia on issues related to arms control. And why did NATO allies support a new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty? I am calling on Russia today to reconsider its decision to suspend its participation in it. We have to understand that this is one of the last major arms control agreements we have. They really won't get to them otherwise.
It's pointless to ask anyone to take action now. The armed forces of Ukraine have proven that the Russian army only stops when stealing household appliances becomes dangerous enough to risk getting shot. It's unnecessary to seek de-escalation opportunities. Europe must show it's prepared to defend its values at all costs. And now we're back to where we started. Let's suppose Putin issues an ultimatum to Ukraine. In 24 hours, the Russian terrorist regime will be ready to use nuclear weapons. What will NATO do? No, we most likely have an answer to this question. Radosław Sikorski, the head of Poland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, told us about this. Quote, the Americans told the Russians that if you detonate a nuclear bomb, even if it doesn't kill anyone, we will strike all your positions in Ukraine with conventional weapons. We will destroy them all. Of course, I don't think this was Radosław's fantasy. I'm just a little concerned about how this guarantee condition will work. What military targets in the occupied territories will come under American attack? Air defense systems. But the Army tactical missile system that have been delivered to Ukraine already cover the entire depth of the occupied territory. Warehouses, headquarters, and communication hubs. Well, after the high-mobility artillery rocket system appeared, the Russians learned to disperse their logistics, dig into the ground, and so on. No, of course not. In the event that firepower against the occupiers increases thanks to air-to-ground missile, 158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, or air-to-ground missile, 86 cruise missiles launched by the Americans, it certainly won't do any harm. But to push the occupiers into the Sea of Azov, constant firepower is necessary. That is, either a military contingent in the form of artillery brigades needs to be deployed in Ukraine, or fire support should be provided by American fighter jets striking the fortified line of the Russian terrorist army with various JDAMs. And that's exactly what I was leading up to. So it all comes down to whether the West, NATO, and the United States will get involved in the war after the use of nuclear weapons or not. And I'm afraid that this answer, let's say, still needs to be agreed upon.
I think it's time for NATO to understand. Either NATO goes beyond its limits or NATO is out of the game. And this idea, which Secretary General Stoltenberg is promoting, and this consensus that NATO can't do anything until an invasion happens on its territory, this idea was rejected in the 90s. We must remember our lessons. NATO intervention is needed. Let's announce it. Tell the Russians to cease fire and stop this. But it's impossible to stop this without NATO intervention.
The West avoids involvement in the war, favoring a strategy of gradual escalation that aligns with their interests. There's only one problem. Russia really does have a royal flush that it can put on the table at any moment. That's nuclear weapons. But don't think that this video is about how Russia can be defeated. On the contrary, NATO has the ability to neutralize Putin's nuclear threats. In fact, discussions about this are already underway. I'm proposing deploying a full European alliance contingent in Ukraine without specifying their deployment location, so that Putin knows any use of nuclear weapons will automatically mean war with all of Europe and then with NATO. Such a clearly drawn red line from democratic capitals would contribute to de-escalation, not the opposite. It is precisely the firm stance of the West that can channel Putin's aggression and demonstrate its futility. Crucially, people abroad grasp this concept. Here is an article in the highly respected Foreign Affairs titled "Europe, not NATO, should send troops to Ukraine." And I will quote only the conclusion reached by international relations experts. Instead of provoking a Russian escalation, the presence of European troops is more likely to prevent the spread of the conflict and prevent further damage to Ukraine's economy and infrastructure. And maybe it's naive, but it seems to me that we have an opportunity to intensify this process, even if only by 0.1%. If we keep raising this issue and conveying to the Western electorate that determination today means peace tomorrow. After all, the time they've had for their indecisiveness has been paid for with the lives of the very best sons and daughters of Ukraine. It's simply unfair.
All my dreams, this war has destroyed them all. I had everything. A home, a family, my second mother, that's my mother-in-law. We can't find her. My cousin and many friends and family were killed. My son was hurt too. Well, it doesn't go away without a trace. A child's psyche, as they explained, it doesn't go away without a trace. The doctors prescribed him medication for 3 years because after everything he saw, all those bodies, when they were running, they hid among the corpses. Then, when they were passing through the checkpoints, the orcs wanted to take my wife. They tortured her, asking where I was. Well, alright, my wife did well, and she made our son say it too. But he didn't understand why she said that Dad abandoned us, that he's bad, and our son said it too. If he hadn't said that, I don't know what would have happened to him now. Although all his life he said, my dad is in the military, he drives a tank.
Probably, in the context of the colossal danger that the Putin regime poses to the world, it's silly to pay attention to such things. But I'm really surprised at how much Putin and his electorate turned out to be cowardly idiots. Sorry, but how else? Well, a state that claims to be a world leader can't open a criminal case with the wording for shooting down an A-50 plane not intended for combat operations. It just can't, simply for the sake of preserving its image. But it just looks pathetic to be outraged that the Ukrainian armed forces shot down a plane that was guiding missiles at them. The president appears pathetic for initiating the special military operation and now threatening a country he never viewed as legitimate with nuclear weapons, akin to a teenager who soiled himself. Humanity, if it wants to at least survive this century, simply must develop countermeasures to such actions by aggressors and make sure these countermeasures work for centuries. And we, my friends, are able to help this process. I believe in it. I hope you believe in it too. But, as always, it's up to you to decide whether to be or